Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuation of the story Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights, yes. And last words were I hardly gave the circumstance a thought, though it was a strange sound in that place at 2 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, please subscribe to the channel and please share the videos. Please subscribe, much appreciated. Okay. Mr. Kenneth was fortunately just issuing from his house to see a patient in the village as I came up the street, and my account of Catherine Linton's malady induced him to accompany me back immediately. He was a plain, rough man, and he made no scruple to speak his doubts of her surviving this second attack, unless she were more submissive to his directions than she had shown herself before. "Nellie Dean," said he, "I can't help fancying there's an extra cause for this. What has there been to do at the Grange? We've odd reports up here. A stout, hearty lass like Catherine does not fall ill for a trifle. And that sort of people should not either. It's hard work bringing them through fevers and such things. How did it begin?" "The master will inform you," I answered. "But you are acquainted with the Earnshaw's violent disposition, and Mrs. Linton caps them all. I may say this, it commenced in a quarrel. She was struck during a tempest of passion with a kind of fit. That's her account, at least, for she flew off in the height of it and locked herself up. Afterwards she refused to eat, and now she alternately raves and remains in a half-dream, knowing those about her, but having her mind filled with all sorts of strange ideas and illusions." "Mr. Linton will be sorry," observed Kenneth, interrogatively. "Sorry? He'll break his heart should anything happen," I replied. "Don't alarm him more than necessary." "Well, I told him to be aware," said my companion, "and he must bear the consequences of neglecting my warning. Hasn't he been intimate with Mr. Heathcliff lately?" "Heathcliff frequently visited at the Grange," answered I, "though more on the strength of the mistress having known him when a boy than because the master likes his company. At present he's discharged from the trouble of calling, owing to some presumptuous aspirations after Mr. Linton, which he manifested. I hardly think he'll be taken in again." "And does Miss Linton turn a cold shoulder on him?" was the doctor's next question. "I'm not in her confidence," returned I, reluctant to continue the subject. "No, she's a sly one," he remarked, shaking his head. "She keeps her own counsel, but she's a real little fool. I have it from good authority that last night, and a pretty night it was, she and Heathcliff were walking in the plantation at the back of your house about 2 hours, and he pressed her not to go in again, but just mount his horse and away with him. My informant said she could only put him off by pledging her word of honour to be prepared on their first meeting after that. When it was to be, he didn't hear, but you urge Mr. Linton to look sharp." This news filled me with fresh fears. I outstripped Kenneth and ran most of the way back. The little dog was yelping in the garden, yet I spared a minute to open the gate for it, but instead of going to the house door, it coursed up and down, snuffing the grass, and would have escaped to the road had I not seized it and conveyed it in with me. On ascending to Isabella's room, my suspicions were confirmed. It was empty. Had I been a few hours sooner, Mrs. Linton's illness might have arrested her rash step. But what could be done now? There was a bare possibility of overtaking them if pursued instantly. I could not pursue them, however, and I dared not rouse the family and fill the place with confusion, still less unfold the business to my master, absorbed as he was in his present calamity, and having no heart to spare for a second grief. I saw nothing for it but to hold my tongue and suffer matters to take their course. And Kenneth being arrived, I went with a badly composed countenance to announce him. Catherine lay in a troubled sleep. Her husband had succeeded in soothing the excess of frenzy. He now hung over her pillow, watching every shade and every change of her painfully expressive features. The doctor, on examining the case for himself, spoke hopefully to give him having a favourable termination, if we could only preserve around a perfect and constant tranquillity. To me, he signified the threatening danger was not so much death as permanent alienation of intellect. I did not close my eyes that night, nor did Mr. Linton. Indeed, we never went to bed, and the servants were all up long before the usual hour, moving through the house with stately tread, and exchanging whispers as they encountered each other in their vocations. Everyone was active but Miss Isabella, and they began to remark how sound she slept. Her brother, too, asked if she had risen, and seemed impatient for her presence and hurt that she showed so little anxiety for her sister-in-law. I trembled lest he should send me to call her, but I was spared the pain of being the first proclaimant of her flight. One of the maids, a thoughtless girl who had been on an early errand to Gimmerton, came panting upstairs, open-mouthed, and dashed into the chamber, crying, "Oh dear, dear, what mun we have left? Master, master, our young lady." "Hold your noise," cried I, hastily, enraged at her clamorous manner. "Speak lower, Mary. What is the matter?" said Mr. Linton. "What ails your young lady?" She's gone. Yon. Heathcliff's run off with her," gasped the girl. "That is not true," exclaimed Linton, rising in agitation. "It cannot be. How has the idea entered your head? Ellen Dean, go and seek her. It is incredible. It cannot be." As he spoke, he took the servant to the door, and then repeated his demand to know her reasons for such an assertion. "Why, I met on the road a lad that fetches milk here," she stammered, "and he asked whether we weren't in trouble at the Grange. I thought he meant for Mrs. Sickness, so I answered yes. Then says he, 'There's somebody gone after 'em, I guess.' I stared. He saw I knew naught about it, and he told me how a gentleman and lady had stopped to have a horse's shoe fastened at a blacksmith shop 2 miles out of Gimmerton, not very long after midnight, and how the blacksmith's lass had got up to spy who they were. She knew them both directly. And she noticed the man, Heathcliff. It was, she felt certain, Heathcliff. Nobody could mistake him. Besides, put a sovereign in her father's hand for payment. The lady had a cloak about her face, but having desired a sup of water, while she drank it, fell back, and she saw her very plain. Heathcliff held both bridles as they rode on, and they set their faces from the village and went as fast as the rough roads would let them. The lass said nothing to her father, but she told it all over Gimmerton this morning. I ran and peeped, for form's sake, into Isabella's room, confirming when I returned the servant's statement. Mr. Linton had resumed his seat by the bed. On my re-entrance, he raised his eyes, read the meaning of my blank aspect, and dropped them without giving an order or uttering a word. "Are we to try any measures for overtaking and bringing her back?" I inquired. "How should we do?" "She went of her own accord," answered the master. "She had a right to go, she pleased. Trouble me no more about her. Hereafter, she's only my sister in name, not because I disown her, but because she has disowned me." And that was all he said on the subject. He did not make a single inquiry further, or mention her in any way, except directing me to send what property she had in the house to her fresh home, wherever it was, when I knew it. For 2 months, the fugitives remained absent. In those 2 months, Mrs. Linton encountered and conquered the worst shock of what was denominated a brain fever. No mother could have nursed an only child more devotedly than Edgar tended her. Day and night he was watching, and patiently enduring all the annoyances that irritable nerves and a shaken reason could inflict. And though Kenneth remarked that what he saved from the grave would only recompense his care by forming the source of constant future anxiety, in fact, that his health and strength were being sacrificed to preserve a mere ruin of humanity, he knew no limits in gratitude and joy when Catherine's life was declared out of danger. And hour after hour he would sit beside her, tracing the gradual return to bodily health, and flattering his own sanguine hopes with the illusion that her mind would settle back to its right balance also, and she would soon be entirely her former self. The first time she left her chamber was at the commencement of the following March. Mr. Linton had put on her pillow in the morning a handful of golden crocuses. Her eye looked stranger to any gleam of pleasure, caught them in waking, and shone delighted as she gathered them eagerly together. "These are the earliest flowers at the Heights," she exclaimed. "They remind me of soft thaw winds and warm sunshine and nearly melted snow. Edgar, is there not a south wind? And is not the snow almost gone?" "The snow is quite gone down here, darling," replied her husband, "and I only see 2 white spots on the whole range of moors. The sky is blue, and the larks are singing, and the becks and brooks are all brimful. Catherine, last spring at this time I was longing to have you under this roof. Now I wish you were a mile or 2 up those hills. The air blows so sweetly. I feel that it would cure you." "I shall never be there but once more," said the invalid, "and then you leave me, and I shall remain forever. Next spring, you long again to have me under this roof, and you look back and think you were happy today." Linton vanished on her the kindest caresses and tried to cheer her by the fondest words, but vaguely regarding the flowers, she let the tears collect on her lashes and stream down her cheeks unheeding. We knew she was really better, and therefore decided that long confinement to a single place produced much of this despondency, and it might be partially removed by a change of scene. The master told me to light a fire in the many weeks deserted parlour, and to set an easy chair in the sunshine by the window, and then he brought her down, and she sat a long while, enjoying the genial heat, and, as we expected, revived by the objects round her, which, though familiar, were free from the dreary associations investing her hated sick chamber. By evening she seemed greatly exhausted, yet no arguments could persuade her to return to that apartment, and I had to arrange the parlour sofa for her bed, till another room could be prepared. To obviate the fatigue of mounting and descending the stairs, we fitted up this, where you lie present, on the same floor with the parlour. And she was soon strong enough to move from one to the other, leaning on Edgar's arm. I thought myself she might recover, so waited on as she was. And there was double cause to desire it, for on her existence depended that of another. We cherished the hope that in a little while Mr. Linton's heart would be gladdened, and his lands secured from a stranger's gripe by the birth of an heir. I should mention that Isabella sent to her brother, some weeks from her departure, a short note announcing her marriage with Heathcliff. It appeared dry and cold, but at the bottom was dotted in with pencil an obscure apology and an entreaty for kind remembrance and reconciliation if a proceeding had offended him, asserting that she could not help it then, and being done, she had now no power to repeal it. Linton did not reply to this, I believe, and in a fortnight more I got a long letter, which I considered odd, coming from the pen of a bride just out of the honeymoon. I'll read it, for I keep it yet, yes. Any relic of the dead is precious, if they were valued living. Dear Ellen, it begins, I came last night to Wuthering Heights and heard for the first time that Catherine has been ill, and is yet very ill. I must not write to her, I suppose, and my brother is either too angry or too distressed to answer what I sent him. Still, I must write to somebody, and the only choice left me is you. Inform Edgar that I'd give the world to see his face again, that my heart returned to Thrushcross Grange in 24 hours after I left it, and is there at this moment full of warm feelings for him and Catherine. I cannot follow it, though. These words are underlined. They need not expect me, and they may draw what conclusion they please, taking care, however, to lay nothing at the door of my weak will or deficient affection. The remainder of the letter is for yourself alone. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, how did you contrive to preserve the common sympathies of human nature when you resided here? I cannot recognize any sentiment which those around share with me. The second question I have great interest in. It is this. Is Mr. Heathcliff a man? If so, is he mad? And if not, is he a devil? I shan't tell my reasons for making this inquiry, but I beseech you to explain, if you can, what I have married. That is, when you call to see me, and you must call, Ellen, very soon. Don't write, but come. and bring me something from Edgar. Now you shall hear how I have been received in my new home, as I am led to imagine the heights will be. It is to amuse myself that I dwell on such subjects as the lack of external comforts. They never occupy my thoughts, except at the moment when I miss them. I should laugh and dance for joy if I found their absence was the total of my miseries, and the rest was an unnatural dream. The sun set behind the grange as we turned onto the moors. By that, I judged it to be 6 o'clock. And my companion halted half an hour to inspect the park and the gardens, and probably the place itself as well as we could. So it was dark when we dismounted in the paved yard of the farmhouse, and your old fellow servant Joseph issued out to receive us by the light of a dim candle. He did it with a courtesy that redounded to his credit. His first act was to elevate his torch to a level with my face, squint benignantly, project his upper lip, and turn away. Then he took the 2 horses and led them into the stables, reappearing for the purpose of locking the outer gate as if we lived in an ancient castle. Heathcliff stayed to speak to him, and I entered the kitchen, a dingy, untidy hole. I dare say you would not know it. It is so changed since it was in your charge. By the fire stood a ruffianly child, strong in limb and dirty in garb, with a look of Catherine in his eyes and about his mouth. This is Edgar's legal nephew. I reflected. Mine in a manner. I must shake hands, and yes, I must kiss him. It is right to establish a good understanding at the beginning. I approached, and attempting to take his chubby fist, said, "How do you do, my dear?" He replied in a jargon I did not comprehend. "Shall you and I be friends, Harrington?" was my next essay at conversation. An oath and a threat to set throttle on me if I did not frame off rewarded my perseverance. "Hey, throttler lad," whispered the little wretch, rousing a half-bred bulldog from its lair in a corner. "Now wilt thou be ganging?" he asked authoritatively. Love for my life urged compliance. I stepped over the threshold to wait till the others should enter. Mr. Heathcliff was nowhere visible, and Joseph, whom I followed to the stables and requested to accompany me, and after staring and muttering to himself, screwed up his nose and replied, Did ever Christian body hear aught like it? Mincing and munching, how can I tell what ye say?" "I say, I wish you to come with me into the house," I cried, thinking him deaf, yet highly disgusted at his rudeness. "None of me. I gettin' summat else to do," he answered, and continued his work, moving his lantern jaws meanwhile, and surveying my dress and countenance, the former a great deal too fine, but the latter, I'm sure, as sad as he could desire, with sovereign contempt. I walked round the yard and through a wicket to another door, at which I took the liberty of knocking, in hopes some more civil servant might show himself. After a short suspense, it was opened by a tall, gaunt man, without neckerchief, and otherwise extremely sombre. His features were lost in masses of shaggy hair that hung over his eyes, and his eyes too were like a ghostly Catherine's, with all their beauty annihilated. "What's your business here?" he demanded grimly. "Who are you?" "My name was Isabella Linton," I replied. "You've seen me before, sir?" I'm lately married to Mr. Heathcliff, and he has brought me here, I suppose by your permission." "Is he come back then?" asked the hermit, glaring like a hungry wolf. "Yes, we came just now," I said, "but he left me by the kitchen door, and when I would have gone in, your little boy played sentinel over the place and frightened me off by the help of a bulldog." "It's well the hellish villain has kept his word," growled my future host, searching the darkness beyond me in the expectation of discovering Heathcliff. And then he indulged in a soliloquy of execrations and threats of what he would have done had the fiend deceived him. Join me. Join me for the next video of Wuthering Heights. Join me for the next video. Find out how Isabel gets on. Join me for the next video of Wuthering Heights with me, Morel Bernard. See you then. Bye.